Ma'am, we can start.
Yeah, we are bang on 7 p.m. and today is 17th of July. I welcome everybody to this virtual meeting on what's the recent advances in chronic myeloid leukemia now has become a very important topic because we have many of the oral TKIs available. We are spoiled by choices, and this has completely turned the history of the disease from a transplant into an oral formulation where people are living for long. And moreover, another important thing is that a lot of genetics are also in place, so that makes it a very exciting options for all of us to use it. And so this background has brought us to a platform where we just need to meet digitally, not directly, and that's how its life is going to be now onwards. Okay, so let's start sharp. Tonight, I invite Dr. Tarun Kumar Datta. Sir is Professor of Medicine in MGMCRI Pondicherry to chair today's session. Also, I invite our program director, Dr. Cherian Suvas, who is an hemato-oncologist and hematologist at Miyot International Hospital, Chennai. I hand over the mic to both of you to take us for today's evening, wishing for a very interactive discussion and keeping to the time. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Dr. Datta, please.
Dr. Datta from Pondicherry. So I welcome Dr. Cherian Subhas and others to this meeting. I now request Dr. Shibas to straight away go into today's first part of the program. You are the moderator for this program, Recent Advances in CML. Dr. Cherian, please. Dr. Subhash, please.
Good evening. Good evening. Thanks a lot, Dr. Anita and Dr. Tarun Datta for the
Thank
invitation. And I'm really honored. And without much, I mean, we will start quickly. And we had, this is a very interactive way. I'm pleased that it's coming on well. And probably in future, we don't need to meet in person at all. CML is a disease which has been going on for younkies, probably one of the earliest disorder cancer which has been found to have a specific mutation and which led to a leukemia. Interesting disease to study from time immemorial and continues to have completely different biology in different age groups as well as different presentations in different geographies, and the more you know about the disease, the more informations we gather. So whether it's the mutations which we have and the therapeutic interventions which we have and follow-up of our patients as well as new treatments. Bone marrow transplant, which was a standard of care 20 years ago, has literally become a Cinderella indication for these types of transplants. And being a transplanter myself, I've hardly done CML apart from 1, 2 in the past 10 years. So that's how rare transplants have become for chronic myeloid leukemia. And but there are lots of data now, some of the newer tyrosine kinase, even in refractory patients, are as good as a transplant as the EBMT data shows. So without much ado, I mean, we probably have to give some time for the pathologist again to know how we monitor what's the difference between mutations in ALLs and CMLs, and what does tyrosine domain mutation means, and when we need to look for them. Do we need to do upfront, or do we need to do at refractoriness, or we need to do at certain point, a time point in their illness, and when we need to think of changing to a second generation or a third generation or consider transplants. And so as good as the therapeutic intervention, probably the understanding of the disease is mostly with the molecular markers and cytogenetics. So I would like to invite, I'm sure you all know about Jayachandran, who's a consultant oncologist and hematologist at Cancer Institute. Dr. Jayachandran, over to you.
Good evening. Good evening to everyone.
Yeah, I can hear you. Good evening.
Yeah, fine. I just sharing my slides now. Is my slides visible?
Yeah,
Yeah.
make it into
Yes.
full.
Yeah, I'm just making it. Is it visible now, ma'am?
Absolutely good. Carry on. Start.
So good evening. I thank the Freedom from Cancer and Novartis for putting up to all of us. And I'm the first speaker over here. I'm going to update, as Anita Madam told, we are spoiled for choices. We have a lot of drugs available now. We have imatinib, we have nilotinib, we have dasatinib, we have bosutinib, and ponatinib was on the way. So again, we are spoiled for choices while choosing drug in a patient with the CML in the first line. So I'm just going to update you about the nilotinib drug. I'm not going to give any comparisons of other drugs as nothing is existing. We can discuss over the moderator session and on how to choose patients. I'm just going to give you an update of nilotinib and the important clinical trials in nilotinib. Okay. So these are the very key trials in the nilotinib. The important trial is the EARNEST-N trial, which gave the approval to the nilotinib, and the study 2101, EARNEST CMR, dialogue, and the trials which look at the TFR. The TFR is the very important and hot topic of CML in this era, that is treatment-free remission. That's the trial which looking at these are EARNEST Freedom, EARNEST Stop, and EARNEST Path trials. And other trials which are also there looking at TFR in nilotinib, that a part of other drugs is Sky trial. And coming on to the EARNEST-N analysis, 10-year analysis, we know that this trial, which was published in 2010 in NEJM, got into nilotinib as a first line therapeutic choice, and this was the second drug. This is the third drug after imatinib and nilotinib, which was imatinib and dasatinib, which was approved for the first line use in CML. And let us look at the 10-year results. And this we know the study design very well. It is first a comparison. It's a 1:1 comparison. Two dose levels of nilotinib, 300 mg BD and 400 mg BD versus imatinib 400 mg OD. And the primary endpoint was the MMR at 12 months. And no trial in CML using second line TK have used an overall survival as endpoint. We all know that overall survival is very important in oncology, but still we cannot show overall survival benefit in the second line TKIs, and there can be no trials which can prove an overall survival, because after the advent of imatinib, what Dr. Subhash mentioned, totally incurable disease became totally curable disease. Almost 90% of the patients became cured of the disease with the tablet taking, with the imatinib being taken for a long time till the lifelong. So again, we cannot show overall survival benefit in any of the second line TKIs, because almost it is equal. Almost the survival of the CML patients are equal to the normal individuals in the plan. So again, the other endpoints were rate of CCYR at 12 months and durable MMR at 24 months. So let us go into the trial, the results of the 10-year update. So there was around 77% of the patients could achieve an MMR by the end of 5 years. And at the end of 10 years, it is 7 point. And it achieved a plateau by 5 years. After 5 years, there was no much increase in the number of people who achieved the MMR. So there was no increase. The plateau reaches by 5 years. So this was a very important thing which came out of this one. So not all people achieve MMR with the second line TKI, but it was comparatively higher compared to the first line TKI, which is imatinib. So imatinib was around 62%, it was 77 to 79% in the second line TKI, which is the nilotinib here. So again, coming into the MR 4.5 level achievement. So looking into again around, it also had a plateau after 5 years, slightly increased, and up to again it plateaued at 8 years. So compared to the imatinib, which was around 39% at 10 years, it was 60%. There was 20% improvement in the achievement of MR 4.5 at the end of 10 years with the compared to the imatinib with the nilotinib. So if you look at the progression to treatment, so the progression was higher with the imatinib, where compared to the nilotinib, it was, even though numbers were very less, still it showed a difference in the survival. Still it showed a difference in the progression. And again, progression also on the study and also on during the core treatment also had a difference. So if you look at the people who had progressed during the 5 to 10 years period, it is interesting to see that the patients who were nilotinib, we did not have any much of progression. Whereas on imatinib, there were 5 additional patients apart from imatinib, apart from the first 5 years, had a progression. This shows that the second line TKIs are more potent and they have a prolonged effect, so that there is no progression even after the 5 years. If you look at the overall survival, as I already alluded to, there cannot be a difference in overall survival with any second line TKI, be it nilotinib, dasatinib, or bosutinib, or ponatinib. We cannot have an overall survival benefit because almost all the survival is equivalent to the normal individuals. If you look at the deaths, there's almost, if you look at the deaths here, it was no difference between the arms. But if you look at the deaths related to advanced CML related deaths, you can clearly see that 16 patients out of the trial died due to CML. 6 and 4 patients in each arm of nilotinib died. There was a difference which was statistically significant. We will know that why there is a difference here. So there was no clear data given why there was a death. Probably it might have been due to the other adverse events related to nilotinib. We all know that nilotinib causes cardiovascular events and other vascular events, which might be a cause for the other deaths in the picture. So looking at we know that early molecular response is that very important predictor of the overall survival. If you know the early molecular response is that achievement of a 10% BCR-ABL levels at 3 months, or achievement of 1% BCR-ABL level at 6 months. If you classify the patients between achievement of 10% versus non-achievement of 10% at 3 months, there was a clear delineation of the survival curves showing that the people who did not achieve the 3-month cutoff of 10% had a poor survival over here, clearly mentioned. And this is not the only this trial which has shown this. All the other second line TKI trials and also the largest trial, which is German CML4 study, also showed this clear delineation of curves between the 3-month endpoint. So always it's very important this is a very important prognostic factor. So as I alluded to in the 2 slides before, cardiovascular events are increased in the nilotinib arm. So we know that nilotinib is not an easy drug. There are a lot of metabolic side effects like hyperglycemia, hypertriglyceridemia, pancreatitis, all increased with the use of nilotinib. And patients with diabetic, again, patients with the history of cardiovascular morbidity, and patients with the history of previous pancreatitis, all have to be using, we have to use this drug with caution, and they have to be closely monitored. And it clearly shows the people with the high Framingham risk group at a higher risk of mortality. And we should always keep into mind that when choosing the second line TKI, these all adverse events with the nilotinib and dasatinib has to be balanced. And also with the bosutinib, again, we have one more bosutinib for first time. So again, we all have to be clearly balanced, and we have to choose on case by case basis to look at the exact benefit, give the exact benefit to the patients. So coming on to the TFR studies. TFR is the important thing in the current era of the CML. TFR is the treatment-free remission, where the first trial which came out of TFR, which was with imatinib, was a STIM trial. After which there was a lot of battery of trials like STIM2, A-STIM, again HOVON, PISTUR, and a lot of trials came out. And the largest trial, EOSKY, was also published. And in second line, this is the nilotinib was Ernest Freedom and Ernest Stop, and Daddy was the trial in the using dasatinib. So if you look at across all these trials, one clear thing is that there are some patients after the achievement of very deep molecular response, the disease doesn't come back. So there is something beyond in our immune system. A lot of hypotheses that NK cell activity, T cell activity, Treg activity, a lot balancing between NK cell, pro-immune and anti-immune systems keep a balance when there's a deep molecular response, so that the disease doesn't come back. So that we achieve an immune tolerance to CML. So we have to identify such patients. So most all of these trials which I mentioned, using either first line TKI or using a second line TKI, had, if you had stopped the drug after a deep molecular response, approximately around 50% of the patients did not get back the disease after 2 years, and 50% had the disease coming back. And almost 99% of the patients where the disease came back, the disease, after restarting the TKI, original TKI, the disease went back into the remission, which was initially attained. So this is the Ernest Freedom is the first line trial, TFR trial on nilotinib. Patients who were on nilotinib for more than 2 years, achieving more than MR 4.5, had been stopped and then they were observed. These are all phase 2 trials. Again, Ernest Stop is the patients who were, which is a trial which is looking at TFR on patients where nilotinib was used as a second line drug, and again it was also ongoing, and interim results are out, and again it also exactly shows it is 49% of the people did not actually did not had a disease coming back after 1 year, and the Ernest Freedom also showed around 50% of the patients did not have any disease coming up after. The Ernest Path is a different study which looks at a lot of pathological endpoints. It has a peculiar inclusion criteria. The patients who are on imatinib for more than 2 years, who achieved CCYR or more, but did not achieve MR4. We know MR4 is 0.01. So those people who are between these were randomized between nilotinib for 1 year versus 2 years, and then they are looking at an ideal time of using nilotinib, after which they will be stopped. So it is ongoing. Not even the interim results are out yet. So this is the Ernest Freedom study. As I alluded to, this is the nilotinib has been used as a consolidation for 1 month, 1 year, after which they are stable MR 4.5, they will be stopped and slowly observed with the close monitoring of RT-PCR. That is a very important thing. Patients must have easy accessibility to the RT-PCR. So if you look at in India, the cost of RT-PCR is more than that of the TKIs. So that is the only caveat in using a lot of in doing a trial in India. So if you look at this, they will be closely monitored for the initial first 6 months. They will be monitored for once in a month, after which once in 6 weeks, after which once in 3 months. So it will be very close monitoring for any rise in the BCR able to promptly restart the TKI. So again, I show this, I will explain. And if you look at this, at the end of 2 years, around 50% of the patient had maintained TFR. And if after 2 years, people losing the treatment-free remission are very less, and a lot of mechanisms are being shown. There are different type of mechanisms in that group of people. And in patients, after starting retreatment, patients who lost that MMR, when they put back on the original drug, all the patients re-achieved the original response almost within 7 weeks with an MMR, and within 13 weeks they achieved the MR 4.5, the original responses. So again, if you look at the adverse events experienced during TFR period, this is one peculiar adverse events, which is that we see with the stopping a drug. Always we see adverse events with starting a drug. Here we we had seen such a very peculiar side effects because we commonly call it as TKI withdrawal syndrome. Most of the people after in the first few weeks start having a very bad musculoskeletal pain and myalgias, arthalgias, which is probably due to the TKI withdrawal, and which does not require any interventions, just symptomatic management, after which they slowly settle down. So this is being consistent with all the trials, even with imatinib, dasatinib, and also with nilotinib. This TKI withdrawal syndrome is important thing which has to be identified if the patient is put into the TFR. This is Ernest Stop trial, which I already told about. This is Ernest Stop trial, is a trial which has been stopping nilotinib when we used as a second line. And again, luckily in this also we could see that around 50% of the patients, approximately around 50% of the patients are treatment free at the end of 2 to 3 years. So across all the 3 or 4 available, bosutinib does not have any standard data available for stopping. We have data for imatinib, nilotinib, and dasatinib. All the 3 TKIs across the board, all the stopping trials showed 50% of the patient disease comes back. The biology of the disease, not the drug which controls. And the biology of disease which controls the treatment free remission, not the only only advantage of using a second line TKI over a first line TKI is the rapidity of achieving a MMR, MR4 or 4.5, so that the patient can be put into a TFR. So if you use imatinib, not all patients would get into MR 4.5. If you use a second line TKI like nilotinib or dasatinib, higher percentage of people get into a better response like MR 4.5. 20% higher people can get into MR 4.5. And again, the rapidity of response. If you achieve at MR 4.5 within 5 years of taking imatinib, you achieve it within 3 years of taking the second TKI, so that you can put the patient into early TFR. So this is the advantage of using a second line TKI. There's again, if you stop with any TKIs, 50% of the patients will have the disease coming back. Selection of such patients is very important. So again, this also showed that after the initiation, all the patients achieved the response very clearly, and within few weeks, within 12 weeks, they all achieved the responses. If you look at the survival, again, this trial also clearly showed that there was increased musculoskeletal pain after the stoppage of the drug for initial few weeks, and later on it slowly settled down. This also clearly shows that there's a TKI syndrome in this. And again, this is all the various adverse events which clearly shows that musculoskeletal events and connective tissue has a higher incidence during the initial first stoppage period, first 6 months. And I would thank all the organizers for giving me this opportunity. I stop here. So I think we can have a lot of discussions during the during sessions. If there are any questions pertaining to anything, I am happy to answer now, or else we can have a discussion during this panel discussion.
We have it at the time of the panel discussion, Dr. Jayachandran. Yes. Yeah, Dr. Datta and Dr. Cherian, please take it forward.
Yeah, that was an excellent talk, Dr. Jayachandran. As I said, I think as Dr. Anita Ramesh said, we will have a discussion during the case-based discussion as well as subsequent ones, so that we can have more meaningful discussion after Dr. Pranta's talk. Dr. Pranta Chakrabarti is an eminent hematologist known across the country, and he has been a professor in Calcutta and has plenty of credits and has been instrumental in creating a lot of hematologists across the country. Dr. Pranta is going to enlighten us on the recent 2020 guidelines from European Leukemia Net, and we're looking forward to your talk, Dr. Chakrabarti. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, and for inviting me. It's good to be in Chennai, because this is how we will travel, I think, for the next 1 year.
Yes.
I hope, yeah. So I hope my slides are visible.
Very visible.
Okay, good. And if you have any difficulty in listening to me, I am generating subtitles also using Microsoft Artificial Intelligence. So whenever I look at revision of guidelines, I remember Dilbert, who has been my favorite, I think, for now 30 years. So once the boss was asking him, did you make the changes I asked for? And he said, that depends. Do you remember what you asked me to change? And the boss said, no. So then he said, yeah, I made the changes. So fortunately for us, the ELN guidelines have not been like Dilbert's change. They have actually changed certain things, and I think they have been more pragmatic. And in the next 15 minutes or so, I'll try to just tell you what has changed. So this was in 2013, and we often quote it, and this is now in 2020. And if you ask me what has changed, you look at it, and this was pre-COVID crisis. The first author changed from Italy to Germany. I don't know whether it reflects the quality of care or it has other connotations. So now Professor Hokus is the first author and Professor Baccarani is the second author. Other than that, what you'll see is that this time it has been an open access article. So anybody can access it, and I think the publishing industry is moving towards open access, which is, I think, good for every one of us. So I will be discussing on the diagnostic issues, prognosis, monitoring, first, second line treatment. I think a splendid job by Jayachandran, and so I'll not be dealing too much with them. And other issues like pregnancy and generics, which have also been now given in the guidelines. So if I go into the diagnostic issues, I don't think much has changed because you still have to do a physical examination, which is becoming difficult now. With respect to spleen and liver size, you definitely need to do a CBC with a differential count on the microscope, even if you get an automated one, because you have to look at certain things, especially the basophils. You need to do a bone marrow aspiration and even a biopsy. Now this, I think, while we have the panel discussion, we can debate it, but this is what they say. You obviously have to do a chromosome banding analysis, that is karyotype. You'll do a FISH only in case of not finding a Philadelphia chromosome, and you have to do a qualitative RT-PCR for detecting the exact transcript type before you do a quantitative one. And if you're using second generations, the more important is you should do an ECG and standard biochemical profile with hepatitis B. I think it's better to do our standard pre-op serology, including HIV and HCV. So what has changed? Nothing has changed. Prognostic factors, yeah. So they have tried to settle the scores. You had SOCAL, you had EURO, you had UTOS. So these scores were designed, and some of them were from the pre-TKI era, to evaluate differences in survival or response. Now what you have is, you have a UTOS long-term score, which predicts the probability of dying from CML. And I think this is very relevant because when you counsel your patients, they will ask you obviously about death, and this predicts leukemia-related death. And obviously, like other things, you have a web page for that. You can also have an app where you put it in. You don't need to do all the calculations. I'm just showing you how it is calculated. And this long-term score actually gives you a good prediction, because we say that most of the people will not die because of CML. Another important thing in prognosis is the definition of additional chromosome abnormalities. So it's basically a trisomy 8 or second Philadelphia chromosome. We knew some of this because this had come in 2016, but high risk additional chromosome abnormalities predict a poorer response and a higher risk of progression. So this has been documented. In the last version, the additional chromosomal abnormalities were mentioned as a warning, but this time the panel recommends classifying it and treating patients with high risk. And so it's not a warning anymore. They immediately go to high risk, and you can use second line there. So what has changed from 2013? As I told you, that UTOS long-term survival score and ACA becoming high risk. Now for monitoring. Well, this we all knew that this was there, you know, when first imatinib came, complete cytogenetic response, then we started doing molecular. And so for every log, we used to call them MMR or MR3, then MR4, MR4.5. Right now, we have the technology to look at MR5. Maybe we'll have more sensitive technology in future. And this is how the log goes. But we have gone into the semantics because we don't know what is complete molecular response. So we have changed that. We do not call it anymore CMR. What we are trying to call it is molecularly undetectable leukemia. So there's a hint there that according to the current technology, we can't detect the leukemia. But that does not mean that you have had a complete response. And how frequently will you do it? Well, CBC every 2 weeks until you have a complete hematologic response, more frequently in the event of toxicity. And then obviously, as we all do, quantitative PCR at least every 3 months, even after an MMR is achieved and confirmed. This may be difficult in the long run. Cytogenetics may not be sufficient to monitor response, but when should it be done for monitoring? When you have atypical translocations or you have rare or atypical BCR-ABL1 transcripts that cannot be measured by quantitative PCR. And if you suspect resistance and you have treatment failure because you want to rule out ACAs, obviously if there's progression, you should do a chromosomal banding. FISH may be only needed in patients with atypical transcripts, but it's not highly recommended. Then the milestones, you know, which has become fairly well known. So not much has changed, but I'll repeat it. So obviously optimal cannot be at baseline. At 3 months, optimal is less than equal to 10. At 6 months, less than equal to 1. At 12 months, remember, not 18, less than 0.1. And any time it should be less than 0.1. This is important, especially when you're trying to stop the drug for TFR. Warning. First warning, as I told you, even at baseline is if you have a high risk ELTS score or you have a additional chromosomal abnormality. At 3 months, more than 10%. At 6 months, more than 1 to 10. At 12 months, so it's just that it's more than 0.1, but it should be less than 1, obviously. And at any time, if you lose your 0.1 or less, then it's a warning. And what is failure? More than 10 at 3 months. And then when you're doing it at 6 months, if you get more than 10% and you repeat it in 1 to 3 months, if you get, so the basic thing here is at 6 months, you get it more, you can repeat it. But if it's still more than 1%, then it's a failure. So they have made it more rigid there. And then more than 1% or mutations or high risk ACA, it has remained almost the same. They have mentioned certain things that for patients, when you're aiming at TFR, which was already discussed, optimal response at any time is BCR-ABL1 less than 0.01%. So if you're not looking at TFR, you can be happy with what I told you. But if you want TFR, it has to be MR4. And a change of treatment may be considered if MMR is not reached by 36 to 48 months. So, you know, if you say that you're going on and you'll see, you might have to do something else. And during TFR, loss of MMR, as I told you, more than 0.1% indicates failure and you have to intervene. So this is about monitoring. First line treatment, have they changed a lot? Well, we know that these are all available and only Radotinib is not available in India. And for certain particular mutations, we can use certain drugs. Some in vitro data suggests that E255K and to a lesser extent E255V may be poorly sensitive to bosutinib, and more data is coming here. They have also mentioned about generics, you know, as long as a generic drug meets the national standards of the country involved in terms of quality of production, bioavailability and efficacy, then it's an acceptable alternative to the brand product. And if a patient is changed from a brand to a generic product, then enhanced vigilance for the first 6 months in terms of sustaining response and observing for new adverse events. So it is recommended that the patient continues to use the same generic brand in order to avoid potential side effects, because though there are so many generics, there can be differences in drug structure, bioavailability, and excipient. Nothing else in first line. I come to second line, failure or resistance. I have defined failure. Investigate for BCR-ABL1 kinetic domain mutations. Intolerance or treatment-related complication. Decision depends on not only the patient, physician, but also the patient, and what type of supportive care you have and how much motivated the patient is. In case of warning, it depends upon the policy of early treatment discontinuation or patient-related factors, age, comorbidities, tolerance, and whether you can shift to another molecule. So, in the absence of BCR-ABL1 kinetic domain mutations, and this is a good one, which I liked, there can be no clear recommendation for any particular second generation TKI. All second line TKIs are effective if there are no mutations. In the absence of alternatives, a TKI should be continued even amongst the chronic phase patients who do not achieve cytogenetic response. So you don't stop the drugs. And beyond second line, the choice of TKI should be guided by the sensitivity profile of the mutations, and particularly T315I, we already know it. Suboptimal response to 2 or more TKIs, and this is where the transplanter comes in, from consideration of an allogenic stem cell transplant. And for the last part, what are the other issues? We have to remember certain things, though I think these ELN guidelines are more pragmatic than those published in 2013. In Asia and in Africa, the median age at diagnosis is less than 50 years, where there is 57 years. We always talk of a decade earlier. Age is an important variable in the choice of treatment because overall survival, comorbidities, and the development of complications are all related to the age. So if you're starting it in a young person, you have to consider those things. TFR may be the main goal for any patient, irrespective of age, but younger the patient, the stronger the case for achieving TFR, and I think that is how our brain acts. Now, what about end phase? If you cannot get an effective TKI, observe closely, consider early allo-HCT. If it's a primary blast phase, you can start with imatinib or change to a second generation according to the mutation profile. Resistance, ponatinib or experimental agent. Failure to ponatinib, again, high risk of progression, early allo-HCT. So basically, if your second generation TKIs are failing, then you have to think of transplant. Accelerated phase has to be treated as high risk patients, which includes the ACAs, and you should proceed to allo-HCT if response not optimal. If they progress to blast phase, try to return them to chronic phase 2. Outcome with currently available, all the TKIs are poor. Addition of chemotherapy based on what type of blast crisis. Choice of the TKI should be based on prior therapy and the mutation data. But if you achieve CP2, chronic phase 2, proceed to transplant. So whatever I have told you, understand when in CP1 and when in CP2, patient progressing to AP. For patients progressing to BP, offer allo-HCT after initial control of the disease, because whatever data we have till now, transplant-related morbidity and mortality in frank blast phase is very high. Pregnancy, men planning fatherhood do not need to discontinue treatment with first or second generation. This is very clear, but all TKIs are teratogenic and are contraindicated during pregnancy, though we have certain anecdotal reports that people continued. Low-level secretion of TKI in breast milk contraindicates their use during breastfeeding. Women eligible for a trial of TKR can also safely discontinue their TKI in order to conceive. So this is another indication of TFR. Women who lose MMR and are pregnant are likely to reach term without a clinical need for restarting. So during pregnancy, if they lose it, wait till the delivery and start it. I think TFR, I'll not discuss it because it will all come during panel discussion. After stopping nilotinib or dasatinib as either first or second line, probability of maintaining TFR has been around 50%, which is similar to the results after stopping imatinib also. And the most important determinant is the duration of deep molecular response for achieving success for TFR. So the requirements, some are obviously mandatory that the CML has to be in CT only because data is lacking. The patient should be motivated. I think the physician should be motivated to do monthly monitoring and access. I think this is a very important issue to high quality qPCR international scale with rapid turnaround of PCR test results. So minimal, where you can stop allow is first line therapy if intolerance was the only reason. Typical, 1382 or 1482 transcripts. Duration should ideally be more than 5 years, more than 4 years for second generation, and MR4 or better for at least 2 years. There should be no prior treatment failure. But who are the best candidates? Anyone who has taken it for more than 5 years, deep molecular response for more than 3 years, and if it is MR 4.5, you can bring down the 3 to 2 years. So panel does not recommend a first line second generation TKI or a change to a second generation TKI for first a DA molecular response. You saw that they can achieve it. They agree that a change may be considered only in selected patients. Who are they? Younger patients with low or intermediate disease, patients for whom TFR is a high priority for many reasons, and women who wish to become pregnant. A change from second generation TKI to imatinib can be considered when no deep molecular response is achieved within 5 years. And why is that? Because post 5 years, we do not have enough data and we can contemplate that there can be serious cumulative toxicity. So if someone has not achieved deep molecular response by 5 years, this is another pragmatic opinion, you can shift to imatinib. So this was what I felt this ELN guidelines tried to tell us. And I think we'll have a lively panel discussion where we will thrash out some of the issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Subhash? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that excellent talk, Dr. Pranta Chakravarti. And I think we have got, if there is any burning question for Dr. Pranta, I think you can fire away now, or else can we get on with the panel discussion and then have all the discussions during the cases or subsequent to it? Is that okay, Dr. Ramesh?
Yes, that's fine. Okay. We request the speakers to be with us because important certain clarifications are needed. Okay. So, sir, you introduce the panelists, please.
Yeah, I'll get mine. I'm sorry. Yeah. So we have a really eminent group of panelists. I don't know who are all here, but I think Dr. Kishore is not here, my colleague. I think he has gone on a COVID duty. I think he is just, I don't know which one is worse, COVID duty or here, but certainly he has gone to do the COVID duty. And Dr. Kripa Shankar is the medical oncologist from PSG. I've got, he's a consultant assistant professor in PSG as well as in PSG hospitals. And Dr. Subaya is consultant hematologist, my colleague from Trichy. And Dr. Bhavesh Paladia is one of our other good colleagues from middle of Tamil Nadu from Namakkal. And Dr. Arun Ramanan is an assistant professor. I didn't know that he is an assistant professor in Stanley Medical College, which is my alma mater. Any Stanleyans are welcome. And Dr. Aruna Rajendran, I don't think you need much introduction to her, is our pediatric consultant, hematologist and oncologist and BMT physician who leads quite a lot of clinical trials in ICH. Dr. Rajesh Bolam is a consultant medical oncologist and hematologist from Yashoda. And Dr. Krishna Chaitanya is an eminent oncologist from Care Hospital in Hyderabad. And we have pathologists from our own SRMC, Dr. Phoebe Ranjita, and a pathologist, Dr. Tanka, professor of pathology from SRMC, and my good young colleague, Dr. Pardhan from Cancer Institute in Narayar. Thank you.
And also Dr. Chandra Mauleshwari is also with us. She's also
Right, I'm really sorry. I haven't got it with me. Yeah, we have got Dr. Chandra Mauleshwari, who is another eminent pathologist from. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Ravi. Anytime.
Yeah, hello, thank you everybody. We have now got a good idea about how to do and deal with the CML. This case-based discussion, what we are going to see, what we are doing actually in practice, we have seen the guidelines and how to go about. So that's a 42-year male with loss of appetite, abdominal pain, and came to the OPD, has a splenomegaly, and we have heard in the COVID pandemic it's difficult to palpate, but don't forget clinical examination is there. Liver was mildly enlarged, he had edema, no other comorbidities. Okay, now we investigated, hemoglobin was quite good. The white blood cells were around 12.6, had a good platelet count, blast 1%. Basically no organomegaly, but a mild palpable spleen. And the peripheral smear was suggestive of that there is a precursor of the myeloid series. And then we attempted to do the bone marrow aspirate and did the PCR. Okay, so patient was diagnosed as a Philadelphia positive chronic myeloid leukemia. Now, quick low so-called risk. Now, quick questions to all my panelists, including our pathologist. How do you proceed? What are the investigations would you do when a newly diagnosed patient suspected in a peripheral smear with chronic myeloid leukemia? Any of the panelists, please?
The count is a little low.
Yeah, ma'am, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
Total
Yes,
count is within normal limits, little on the upper side.
Yes.
But the differential count of other cells were not given. Maybe the left
Okay,
shift would have been there. So anyway, we have to do a bone marrow as per the guidelines. Also, sometimes we may see cluster of blasts in bone marrow biopsy. So already karyotyping has been done. So bone marrow biopsy is the ideal one to be done. Bone marrow aspirate and biopsy.
Okay, anybody else, please?
Yeah, I am Dr. Tanga here. Apart from this, after confirming it with a FISH and chromosomic banding analysis and baseline qualitative RT-PCR has to be done to know the transcript type. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Qualitative has to be done in the initially to know what is any other mutations are there in ABL, BCR, because nowadays you get lot of resistance to the drug. So initial qualitative RT-PCR is recommended, apart from what MB madam said.
Yeah, Chandra Mauleshwari.
Yes, ma'am. One more point to add. Initially, it was during my postgraduate days, that is 15 years ago, it was considered that CML is a peripheral smear diagnosis. But of course, we have to go ahead with bone marrow aspiration and bone marrow biopsy for obvious reasons. Bone marrow aspirate to find out the accelerated or blast phase or chronic phase, and then for cytogenetics also. And then more bone marrow biopsy, apart from what Febi madam highlighted, like the clusters of blasts can be well made out in bone marrow biopsy. But apart from that, the reticulin fibrosis, which is present in the bone marrow biopsy, also has to be highlighted because it has some prognostic significance. And then, of course, we have to go ahead with the cytogenetics, FISH if required, and then 100% RT-PCR qualitative.
Okay, do you do the RT-PCR on the, suppose you have got a good bone marrow sample, okay, and you have also a peripheral blood. Which would you like to use to do the RT-PCR? The peripheral blood or the bone marrow sample?
Bone marrow sample is what I would feel, ma'am, but I would like the other panelists also to opine on this. If it is bone marrow aspirate also is available, I think I will go ahead with only a bone
Ma'am,
marrow.
in initial,
Over
shall I come in, madam?
Yeah, please.
Initial BCR qualitative PCR
Yes,
is to just to know the what is the transcript exactly to later on quantify it. So be it peripheral blood or bone marrow, you will have cells like millions and millions of cells in the both in peripheral blood and also in the bone marrow. So the yield is not an issue whether you do it in the bone marrow or in the peripheral blood. So later on also during assessments, there has been a lot of studies comparing the bone marrow aspiration PCR and the bone marrow peripheral blood PCR has been done. So those have been also shown that there are a lot of correlations between the peripheral blood PCR and the bone marrow. So it's very clear that initially there's not necessary to take much sample in a bone marrow for RT-PCR. Peripheral blood itself is enough.
Can I ask
For the cytogenetics, you need to do the bone marrow.
Yeah, cytogenetics, absolutely cytogenetics, because metaphases will not be adequate, because when you grow the peripheral blood lymphocytes, it will take some time longer to grow the peripheral blood lymphocytes. Also, there sometimes that might not go if you use the peripheral blood for cytogenetics. Whereas when you use the bone marrow for doing it, the metaphases will be good. So absolutely cytogenetics must be done on the bone marrow, but peripheral blood doesn't need.
Yeah,
So you need
Dr.
to take a lot of samples from the bone marrow.
Yeah,
For
thank you.
PCR.
Yeah, Dr.
I also
Aruna.
agree with them.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, your thought process in a child, you do it under mild sedation.
So we always prefer sedation in children, even if they are 18 years old. So because it's definitely a first painful procedure for them. So if sedation is feasible, that is what we prefer. So in my private sector, I also do a biopsy. But if a child comes to ICH where deep sedation may not be always feasible, so that time we may stop with an aspiration alone, bone marrow aspiration alone. And we all, as discussed, we send both the peripheral blood or bone marrow sample for FISH or a PCR interchangeably in the diagnosis time. But during follow-up, we use only peripheral blood PCR studies. We possibly have not done a bone marrow again for a CML child, except at the time of diagnosis. And for children, I can even tell later how it is different for children.
Yeah, and Aruna, at relapse you might be doing to see the mutation, or you don't do that also. Bone marrow.
You say about BCR-ABL mutations, ma'am. So we do mandatorily a FISH for BCR-ABL for all children, including karyotyping, but we always send a FISH also. And for in follow-up, we do a quantitative RT-PCR. Once in 6 months, we do.
Yeah.
Okay. In the government sector.
Sorry, Dr. Anna, just a quick one.
Yeah,
So,
yes, me, Dr. Subhash.
yeah, I was about to ask this question. Anyway, you have told me. Why FISH and PCR?
Let me come in, sir. Sir, we usually practice cytogenetics and RT-PCR qualitative, sir. If there's a discrepancy between two reports, if you have a RT-PCR positive and the cytogenetics is negative, or if you have the other way around, if you have the cytogenetics positive with RT-PCR negative, then we go ahead and do the FISH for confirmation. That's all. So we don't routinely, either it's a FISH or RT-PCR, qualitative RT-PCR upfront. You don't do it both. We don't do it, do the both. There's no, as you said, there's no point in doing both at upfront.
Yeah, FISH may be.
One thing, madam, I want to clarify something. Cytogenetics report comes so after a month.
Yes.
While, after that, we cannot go back again for FISH. So always it is FISH is preferable because of the TAT.
RT-PCR is more.
Also, there is. Yeah, RT-PCR, of course.
RT-PCR, we will have always we have three things, ma'am. One is cytogenetics, another is FISH, and RT-PCR. We usually do the cytogenetics and the RT-PCR together. If there's a discrepancy between both the reports, then we go ahead when if we get any one of the things, we go ahead and start the TKI. But if there's a discrepancy between any of the reports, then we go ahead and do the third one. This is
Yeah. What Dr. Fabi is trying to tell that there'll be a gap of 1 month after starting TKI. Do you want to go back and do the fish again?
We will have the bone marrow stained bone marrow slides will be there. We will have adequate bone marrow stained slides.
In the stained slide, we cannot do fish.
Unstained slides. Sorry.
No. In the slides, we cannot do. We need blood. Yeah,
Interface fish.
is considered to be
no. Even for that, slides cannot be used.
Ma'am, we are routinely using slides only for fish, ma'am. Interface fish.
Maybe the bone marrow as such preserved. Interface.
No, ma'am.
Okay, interface fish you are doing.
Interface fish, ma'am, not the metaphase fish, ma'am. It is routinely.
And another advantage of fishes, it studies about 200 to 500. The resolution is better. And there is one silent Philadelphia that can be detected only by fish, not by karyotyping. So these are the advantages of fish over karyotyping.
Cytogenetics. Ma'am, but RT-PCR is supposedly the...
that of course, that no issue about it.
Each investigation has its own pros and cons, ma'am.
Yes,
so
yes.
We can keep on discussing, but what we do in our hospitals, what I'm telling. But
Yes.
every consultant, each and as Aruna madam told, they have their own protocols. Each and every consultant and each and every practitioner has their own protocols.
Yes.
So,
Okay,
we have
Jayachandra.
to, okay.
Yeah, we are doing over the.
Madam, 1 second, ma'am. Ma'am, the importance of fish is there when there is a pH negativity, and as well when there are atypical transcripts. Because during the follow-up, we shouldn't just send for RT-PCR regular transcripts. We will miss that. The importance of fish comes there during the monitoring. When there is a atypical BCR-ABL transcripts, we have to monitor them with fish.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's silent pH.
Yes, so fish also comes into the armamentarium for initial evaluation as far as chronic myeloid leukemia. Now,
Yes.
what scoring system do you use? Scoring system and what drug?
The scoring system which has been commonly used widely is the so-called scoring system. But now, recently, there is a scoring system called ELTS, which is the latest scoring system which is to be used hereafter. Probably it might replace the so-called in some time.
Yeah, actually, yes, anybody else who wants to comment on this?
Yeah, so hi ma'am, Kripa here.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think we could use the UTOS scoring system as well, because it predicts your probability of achieving a CCYR at 18 months and also predicts your survival as well. So the UTOS score also can be used. So that's something which I've been using in practice as well. And yeah, so that's something which I use.
I think if you see the NCCN 2020 guidelines, there is one is the so-called score, next is the Euro scoring, Hasport score, and the last is the EuroTOS long-term survival ELTS score. Okay, both of them are approved. They divide the patients into low, intermediate, high. There is a bit of calculation. Okay, I'm not sure in a busy clinical practice how we will do it, but if for long-term is EuroTOS. Otherwise,
there are online calculators which are available for so-called scoring system, and don't need to worry about those all scoring systems.
Scoring system, yeah, fine. And that's what Kripa said. The long term is the that score.
ELTS is the long term latest
long term. It's in the NCCN 2020 guidelines. Now, quick question to other panelists, the clinicians. We saw this previous thing. What are the other tests do you do, leaving about the bone marrow and the peripheral blood? Already Dr. Prantar Chakraborty has highlighted regarding hepatitis. Do you do anything other specific?
Even the ECG is also needed, madam, because most of the TKIs prolong the QTC. So baseline ECG is very essential, apart from serology.
We also get the echo done, ma'am. We also get echo done.
Echo done. Yes, I also get an echo always done. And also the electrolytes.
Yeah, ma'am, Kripa here. I just have a question. I just wanted to know how many of us actually do a quantitative RT-PCR as well upfront, and if so, how it is standardized. Okay. I'd like to have everybody's thoughts on that.
Kripa,
how many of us are actually doing that?
Kripa, I will come to a point here. Because in our resource limited situations, other than my corporate setup, after the CBC, once with a very good hands, I am able to predict that it is a CML pattern. And then readily, most of time, I'll be going for quantitative RT-PCR rather going for in between that fish for detecting BCR-ABL transcript. because it makes simple jobs. Most of time we will be getting this very often is our usual BCR-ABL transcript. And when these things are not working out of fashion only, then we will go and look for fish and otherwise cytogenetics for.
Let me answer the first question.
Yeah, Jesse. Yeah, I know. I'm waiting for your reply.
Let me this RT-PCR quantitative upfront. There's a lot of controversies in this. Okay, so upfront, if you are going to measure RT-PCR quantitatively, about 20% that is not accurate because there's a lot of transcript issues. You are using ABL as a housekeeper gene. And also, if you quantify BCR-ABL, the primers of ABL and primers of BCR-ABL tend to be similar. If you are going to quantify it and you use the kinetics as over time, then you have to use a housekeeping gene of GUSP22 or some other housekeeping gene. You should not use ABL1 as a housekeeping gene. If you are going to use some other housekeeping gene as a control, then it is very much okay to use a kinetics. But if you are going to use ABL1, then if you are going to measure a value above 20%, it might not be accurate. That's the only important thing which has to be
comment from the pathologist over here.
Ma'am, our books, hematopathology books clearly says that quantitative PCR should not be used for diagnosis. It is for monitoring, for assessing the molecular response. Initially, we do the baseline quantitative qPCR.
Exactly, madam. As said, must not be used for clinical practice. The quantitative PCR
for monitoring
is not needed for clinical practice. For clinical trials, when they are going to use the kinetics of PCR, kinetics of the BCR-ABL for all, then they use the quantitative PCR upfront, provided they don't use the ABL1 as a housekeeper gene. They use GUSP22 as the housekeeper gene or some housekeeper gene, whichever they like.
So yeah, JC, while you're at it, probably I just wanted to make a quick comment. I mean, like, I'm sure we've all heard about the Australian data where, you know, you're looking at a 50% drop, as far, like rightly pointed out on the kinetics, a 50% drop from your quantitative RT-PCR at baseline. And if you don't have that, probably you could early switch to second generation TKI. We have a few studies on that as well.
Yeah, so, you know, those all trials use GUSP22 as a housekeeper.
Yeah, correct. Agreed. So I just wanted to know if anybody is actually doing that in practice as well.
I think 3 months cutoff of 10% or 6 months cutoff of 1% is very good. I suppose instead of using the kinetics, our people are not very much affordable for giving so much. If you are going to use kinetics,
so let's say if you have a patient who can afford anything in the world,
yeah,
would you
then,
want to do that?
Even then, I think very well clinical trials have very well clearly proven that more than 10% at less than 3 months at 10%.
That's fine. Agree.
Can we move on to the next question? Yep. Okay, thank you. What should be the first line of treatment if you think it's a so-called low risk and the patient is in a very good general condition? I want opinion from all different panelists because everybody.
What is the age of the patient, ma'am?
42. And I want everybody from different workplaces to comment what would your drug of choice be. Okay, Dr. Arun. Suppose you had Stanley, and what would you have written?
In Stanley, we usually start with imatinib. We are not provided with the second generation TKIs. But of course, in our other corporate practices for low risk or less count, then we will just go with imatinib. And if it is intermediate or high risk, then we will surely go and opt for any dasatinib or nilotinib. But according to the patient's comorbid status, we will decide among any of the drugs.
Yeah, other panelists, please. Bhabesh, Dr. Aruna dosage also.
So for children, we prefer imatinib as the first line, and we always usually give it at 260 mg per meter square. We can go up to 340 mg per meter square in the accelerated phase and the blast crisis. But there are studies which say 340 is slightly superior to 260, but we have always stuck to 260 mg per meter square as the dose for children.
Yeah. Dr. Subbiah is there?
Yes, madam.
No, Dr. Subbiah, why are you silent?
So I stay with imatinib 400 milligrams once daily.
Okay.
I agree with Dr. Subbiah. I'll also go with imatinib, except if we are looking at a treatment-free remission, then we will consider the second line TKI.
Same, I agree with this.
Anybody would like to use it?
Ma'am, if patient is affordable, I would go with the dasatinib 100 mg. If patient is affordable, I would go with dasatinib 100 mg OD.
I would go imatinib for OD, ma'am. Wherever be the practice. I would be happy to go with the imatinib 400 mg wherever I would be in a corporate or in a government or in a low risk patient. I would be happy with imatinib.
Oh, I just wanted to know from the panelists why they were against the second, meaning what makes them not to use dasatinib or nilotinib if patient is affordable. Is there any data to say dasatinib doesn't work in low or something like that?
No, the past 2 months I have.
If affordable. If affordable.
Rajesh, let me explain you. See, long-term data of these nilotinib and dasatinib is not very well known. And they are potent kinases, not only potent kinases, they have additional effects on lot of other kinases. Okay. So I will give you an example. Maybe last week in my OPD, there was a patient with dasatinib who was on dasatinib for the past 7 years. 7 years, and he came with a lot of breathlessness and cough. We are very afraid of putting an hand into him. So at last, I took a lead and I took a step on. It was severe pulmonary hypertension induced by the dasatinib. And there are a lot of adverse events happening with nilotinib and dasatinib. If you are planning for a long-term TKI, see, TFR in India as of now will be tough. Okay. Maybe later on. Only difference which the second line TKI will make is the rapidity of the rapidity of response. Okay. That's all. Okay, there's no difference between other TKI. The overall survival is not going to change. The that's slightly higher than the second line TKIs, and long-term data is very strong with the first line TKI. And one more important thing is only the rapidity is going to happen. And response, then you can
and depth of response is more with dasatinib and second TKI.
Yeah, see that if you want to have
NCCN guidelines, all of them are approved at category 1. So you are open to choose anything.
Yeah, the point is all are approved good drugs. They all give the same amount of results in terms of survival, whereas difference is only in the depth of response. We accept that. The problem is what Jayachandran want to emphasize here is the long-term results of these second generation TKI are not very well published in literature. So we are not aware of a drug used for more than 10 years, 15 years of long duration periods. We know every data of imatinib, every nook and corner of imatinib, we know what will happen in long term also. We have even come with that other suspending protocols with imatinib even. But
Dr. Arun, we are going for trying to stop the drug after 2 to 3 years. We are talking at that level now.
That level, ma'am. But long-term complications and long-term results out of that second generation TKIs are not very well pronounced here. That is why
we are not able to routinely stop TKIs in all patients, ma'am.
Yeah.
No, JC, when you presented, during Jayachandran's presentation, he said early molecular response and deep molecular response is a surrogate for overall survival. So, from his own comments. So
early molecular response is the biology of the disease. Be it
no, you said it's a surrogate for overall survival.
Yeah. See, so, I will tell you something. It's not the 3-month early molecular response. If you give imatinib, if you give dasatinib, if you give nilotinib, still it's going to be the same. Okay.
No. We have
achievement of responses.
Achievement of MFR. The point here is what you are trying to tell is also correct. The point here is we can use the second generation TKIs upfront. Nobody is going to prevent from that. If only you use, then only you can get some mature results like 10-year results, long-term results. If not, you are using, then you are not going to attain that result. We accept that. But the point is, who is going to choose between these two?
What would you have done at Hyderabad in a
nobody is going to prevent you from using second generation TKI upfront. You can still use second generation TKI for low risk group. Also.
It's approved.
Madam. Yeah, couple of months back, we used to give imatinib for each and every patient. But because once the generic dasatinib has come, now we are choosing the generic dasatinib for young patients and giving the choice of each and every patient for explaining about the TFR and all. So past 2 months, we have started almost like 30 to 40 new patients on dasatinib instead of imatinib. When they have no comorbidities, young patients, keeping the toxicity profile in mind. So we are equally giving the importance for second generation as well as the first generation TKIs, and preferably now I'm preferring second generation TKIs because we have enough evidence. It's like 5 years, 10 years is more than enough because we know the biology of the disease and how that goes on in the long run. So we have to give the option for the second generation TKIs wherever it is feasible.
Dr. Rajesh, what about in Hyderabad at your center?
If patient is affordable, I'll use dasatinib, and imatinib is not a holy grail. When you see IRIS data, 10 years data, how many patients are after 10 years on imatinib? 50%, not more than 50% or more on imatinib. Out of the 50% who are not on imatinib, 30% stopped because of the side effects and 20% stopped because of the progression.
Yes, okay.
So,
Yes,
commenting on Dr. Rajesh's comment, see, the thing that dasatinib is for affordable patients is out. If you take dasatinib 50 mg, the cost of a generic dasatinib 50 mg is equal to the cost of imatinib.
Right.
So they are equivalent. And
In a scientific forum, leaving about the cost. In a scientific forum, leaving about a cost. If a patient says, I can afford anything, you give me the best therapy. Or if the CML happens to our own kith and kin, we definitely, whatever we speak on forum, we definitely try to give the best drug. So on a scientific forum, I feel second generation TKIs are better than first generation. If not better, at least same. So at least we should give a try if the patient offers.
No,
we should
but
not have
Dr. Rajesh, in a scientific forum, you can see in front of you itself that for a low risk score SOCAL, all of them are considered equal. Nowhere it is said that a second generation TKI is better than imatinib.
Yeah, it's all.
I'm not saying they are better. When it is equal, why not use?
All are category 1 approval. All are at the same level. There is no difference as per the.
No difference. Yeah, the
So
point here
when there
is
is
you
no
can use
difference,
all
why
the
not
drugs.
use?
You can still give a hand to second generation TKI. If you try, you can get the answers in future.
If Dr. Pranta Chakravarti is there, can you highlight, sir, what will you do in your medical college and your private practice? Or you do same?
No, I do not change, but I do agree. I know that we are not supposed to discuss economics in a scientific forum, but I will say, and I quoted what ELN guidelines say about generics, that it's not that imatinib is very well tolerable and second generations are not. So even in low risk, in a young person, I know that I have a lot of challenges in India now to start even thinking of TFR. But if I think, say, about 4 years, because at least I have to give it for 4 to 5 years, I would still consider generic dasatinib in young persons who have no comorbidities and whom I'm able to know that I'll be regularly able to monitor if there is any effusion or other complications. If I'm not sure of that, I would still use imatinib, irrespective whether I'm in a medical college or in a corporate hospital.
I would like to insist a small point here, ma'am. So when we all switched from the original imatinib to the generic imatinib, lot of patients came back to me saying that this is not okay. Tablet is creating a lot of side effects. So water tablets are okay. Okay, we will know only these things only after. So again, with the BMS dasatinib, the experience is very less among all of us. We might not have, we might use for very less number of patients in second line. Very few patients would have got it in first line. Again, when dasatinib generic use is increasing, we will really see what are the additional side effects we are going to see with the only data from India.
Yeah, one more thing I want to make here. Why not people, why don't you think of, see, nilotinib comes under a patient assistance program. When I'm in the medical college, I will apply for the government scheme. Government scheme gives money with which I can put my patients on nilotinib. I have 20 patients upfront on nilotinib using government scheme. Patient does
Ma'am,
not.
I would like to interfere here. This is not purely on financial protocol. Even in government, as you said, we are getting drugs, but we are not saying that part. We are just going with, when there is a low risk, why you want to choose a second generation TK where the mature results are you are not very well versed with it. So just go with the known weapon. Why you want to expose them to a unexplored weapon? But in case of intermediate or high risk, you are left with minimal choice. You then have to really go for a very good weapon from our armamentarium. That's the basic decision we want to make it. But even still, I can tell that in low risk, nobody is going to prevent us with the literature support and everything, with the guidelines available. Nobody is going to prevent us from using the second generation TK. It is only the practitioner's decision and practitioner's comfortability zone which they are going to deal with.
So yeah, if I can just make a quick comment, I think based on the INEST ND and the Decision studies, the EMR, the early molecular response and deep molecular responses were much better with the second generation TKs as opposed to the first generation. Maybe that did quite translate into a survival advantage. I agree. But the DMR and EMI were definitely better with the second generation as opposed to the first generation TKs. That's the only point that I wanted to make.
Let me come into a picture.
We'll come to that. Wait, the next slides are there. 1 minute. We are coming to that discussion. So we started on the patient like with imatinib 400 milligram. And then how will you follow up this patient in your different practice? Is it feasible to do the RT-PCR? How do you do a genetics? Okay. We know the guidelines. Dr. Pant has told us extensively. What do you do at your hospital? Anybody?
Of course, monthly hemogram panel. Hello. Yeah, monthly complete hemogram and clinical examination, of course, with.
Yeah,
and every 3 monthly, we will be doing quantitative RT-PCR.
We are losing. Hello. Hello.
I think Anita Madam's screen is freezing.
Hello. Yeah, please tell me.
Yes.
Anybody, Bhabesh, what will you do? Dr. Bhabesh.
Ma'am, I agree with Dr. Arun that monthly we'll do a CBC and 3 monthly RT-PCR to monitor.
Yeah, I would like to have a small change. The first month we will do every weekly blood test, and then from the second month onwards we will be every monthly, then and 3 monthly RT-PCR.
I was focusing on this patient where the counts are not very high. That's why.
It's all very common, ma'am. We all will do an complete blood count once in a week or once in 2 weeks initially for a month or two. After that, monthly once we will see the patient initially for 6 months maybe. 3 months BCI-ABL and 6 months BCI-ABL are very important things, very important points which has to be done. We practice initial for 1 month or 1.5 months, 15 days once till the counts are normal.
Okay. Now, quick question to everybody over here. See, the guideline says continue for 2 years. Are we really doing for 2 years, or we do 1 or 2 and get into this thing and then we stop? How many of us do till 2 years or 6 monthly beyond 2 years? Are we doing?
RT-PCR.
Get your question, ma'am. Doing PCR, quantitative.
Quantitative PCR. If you see the second column over here, every 3 months after initiating treatment, look for the BCR-ABL is achieved. Then every 3 months for 3 years, 2 years, and 3 to 6 months thereafter. Are we doing that? That's the question.
Ma'am, in the institute, we practice actually once in 3 months till the achievement of MMR. After which we do it 6 months to 1 year. The patient is affordable to do. We do it once in 6 months.
Yeah. What about Dr. Krishna, Dr. Rajesh, Dr. Subbiah?
Madam, my clinical practice is like we do CBP once in 2 weeks until they achieve the complete hematological response, and the BCR-ABL at 3, 6 and 12. If they're having optimal response, my practice is to do once in a year BCR-ABL quantitative PCR.
6 months. What about Dr. Subbiah? Dr.
Myself,
Dr.
yes, madam. So I do the first RQ at 3 months, then straight away I do at the end of 1 year. I don't do 6 months.
You don't do the 6 months. Okay, but then you'll be missing on some important clue.
I'll follow up the hemogram.
You
if
follow
the counts
the
are fine and symptoms are not there, then I don't do a 6 monthly at a 6 month time point. I just do the end of the year, and if MMR is not there, then I take a call what to do next.
Dr. Subbiah, this is a CMC protocol, or this is like your?
No, this is what we used to do at CMC also, and the same I'm continuing outside also now.
Yeah, correct. And one quick question. This is, I'm sure we all do it from the peripheral blood. We don't go and do the bone marrow.
Yes.
No.
Of course.
All are from the peripheral blood. Yes. Fine. And again, we repeat everything. Once the patient fails, okay, then we repeat the marrow. So this was, he was in response hematologically, and then BCR-ABL was 30%, and the spleen started increasing, and we recorded at the end of 3 months, he had BCR-ABL greater than 10%. What would you do? How do you deal with failures?
What is the BCIBL percentage, ma'am?
30%.
Was the CHR achieved, ma'am?
No, hematological response achieved. Complete hematological response, but the BCR ABL at 3 months was greater than 10%, with almost 30%.
At this stage, we have to go for a bone marrow, ma'am. Get a bone marrow done, see for any additional chromosomal anomalies are there, abnormalities are there, and as well any progression of the phase from CP to APR-BC. That should be done along with the IRMA testing, imatinib resistant mutation analysis, and choose the drug accordingly.
Okay.
With the previous ELN guidelines, this is allowed. In the sense, you can wait until 6 months. But the recent ELN guidelines says that if you find a 3 months level of more than 10%, you can repeat it after a month or two and see it, whether it is still the same. You can intervene as Dr. Krishna told. You can go and do a bone marrow and a mutation analysis, BCR-ABL mutation analysis, where the patient is not, for looking at additional chromosomal abnormalities and looking for resistance mutations.
So, but we are also sticking to the same.
We
are not taking this call now. We will be waiting for another 3 more months, and at the end of 6 months only we will be assessing for the anything else. But otherwise, if complete hematological response is obtained and patient is quite asymptomatic, then we will be continuing the same protocol for another 3 more months. Then only.
But if you see when the BCR ABL is greater than 10% at the end of 3 months,
that's a warning call.
The yellow zone.
Yeah, that's at the 3 months. It's a warning call. We can do, as Krishna said, we can do additional mutation analysis and cytochrome studies.
This is a very debatable. This is very debatable, ma'am. Again, both are right, ma'am. We can wait, or you can intervene. But if you intervene with the one report, is not right. Yeah. You have to do a BCIBL to confirm it after a month or maximum 6 weeks, and then confirm it again. If it is also more than 10%, then you go ahead and intervene.
Dr. Pranta,
that's what let us see. We do a trial in our institute, ma'am. We see that patients who are more than 10% achieve less than 1% at 6 months. There are a group of patients who are slightly less late responders.
Late responders.
Dr. Pranta, your opinion, please, at this point.
Ma'am, just one question in between. That how many this such a low SOCAL score? How many times you have seen that patient has not reached the mark which is at 3 months? Like I would be surprised. It is not very common.
Very rare.
Yeah, so I would actually take it with a pinch of salt. I would go back and get it repeated rather than accept it just like that.
No, there could be compliance issues as well, which is contributing.
So we need to do a repeat one. That's what the panel is saying. Repeat it again to see and not.
Even the guidelines says that, ma'am. If you say 3 months of more than 10%, you go and repeat it after a month. Then only intervene. You don't do a knee-jerk reaction at 3 months. That's it.
So, yeah, so probably if I can just add another point, this is where I feel probably the kinetics of the drop also could be important. If you have a baseline BCR-ABL quantitative here, and if you have a more than 50% drop from your baseline, then you're justified in probably, continuing it for another 3 more months and then reassessing as well.
If you can get a lab to do with the GUS22, I'm very happy, boss.
No, I agreed.
It is done in this case. It is done in this case. The drop is from 30 to 10. So it is definitely less than 50%.
Yeah, so that's one reason. I mean, like why we could actually think of doing that. Agreed, there are practical difficulties in actually choosing a lab that actually does that accurately. But if you could do it, I think I would definitely.
Absolutely accepted. Absolutely.
So Dr. Grupa, we can look at the kinetics after 3 months as well. After 3 months, you do it monthly and see if it is nicely coming down or not.
Yeah. Absolutely, Bharathan. I agree with that as well. I mean, like we could do it even after that. So I'm just saying that probably you don't have to rush and switch to a second generation TKI.
Yes, absolutely. That's the point.
A month's time and repeat it and see where it is. And so over here comes the discussion of the how deep is the response at the level of 3 months, which will predict how deeper the molecular response that translates into a benefit there. 1 minute is not moving. So it's very important this time, and I agree with all the panelists, and being a low so-called risks, just isolated bone marrow having a greater than 10%, we need to repeat it, but it is very important. One has to be on an alert. We have to changing therapies upon failure to get the earliest next response is very important to achieve the optimal response later on. And this landmark analysis, as given in leukemia research, predicts that significant, less than 10% is a significant predictor of long-term survival. Ours was 10, so we were on the borderline. And evidence suggests that outcomes are similar for patients with suboptimal response, provided you are within that thing. So let's skip this slide and let's get into further discussion. Okay, now coming to, when will your, if you want to interfere, okay, like all the panelists have done another marrow and it is showing, say, around 30% BCR-ABL at the end of 4th month. What will you change? Is it time to switch? And if you want to switch, what do you want to switch to? Anybody, please?
If there is a definite progression, or if there is a clear evidence for mutations, then we have to decide the treatment based on the mutation analysis.
Tell me. Yes, you tell me what you want to switch to. What mutation?
Depends on the mutation. Depends on the mutation. Generally, what PCR, FVY, like F315 or E255 or V219, those are very sensitive for dasatinib or bosutinib, whereas F219 or T315A, they are sensitive for nilotinib. So based on that, we can either go for nilotinib or dasatinib. And if it is 315I, then we have to go for ponatinib. If no mutation is there, then there is a choice of increasing the dose of imatinib. And now, as the 7th generation TKIs are available as generics, we can go for dasatinib as well.
Sorry, for benign hematologist, I'd say if there's no IRMA mutation, I'd just continue with imatinib and wait for the 6-month result.
So just one question to all panelists, that when you want to increase the dose, would you directly go for 800 or you will go 600 then 800?
Avesh, let me come in. So I'm not a very fan of increasing the dose. Okay, so if you have an option of going into second line TKI in this, if you have confirmed, if the BCR is more than 10% at 3 months, and you have confirmed it after a month or 6 weeks, you have confirmed it, and you have planned for a switch, exactly as Dr. Krishna told, if you have, it is all based on the IRMA. If the IRMA mutation is negative, then choose it based on the comorbidities, basically, and the patient preference. So this is what I'm not a great fan. There's a trial which is trial from the Australia, as I think it's Tiger trial. I'm not
the Tidal 2 study. Correct.
Tidal trial. That's that trial. And showed that the increase of imatinib was stopped prematurely because that it is not proved to be useful. So if you are going
Dr. Pranta, your opinion at this point, Dr. Pranta Chakravarti?
Yeah. So I entirely agree. Yeah. The first thing which was mentioned earlier, I would say that if I see that it is so high in a low risk, I will sit with the patient for at least 25 minutes to understand whether the patient is taking the drug or not.
Correct.
So, rather than dynamics and all. And if I think that the person has taken the drug and still this is not doing it, maybe I am not a fan of 600 or 800. I have not seen any of my patients tolerating 800. 600 also very few when we couldn't afford a second line. So if I get to see that it is remaining like this, when I recheck it a second time, I would switch to a second generation one. And there, of course, if I don't have any IRMA data, no mutations identified, then as Dr. Jayachandran said, the comorbidities, the profile would tell me it is more a perception based as to which molecule I would choose.
Correct, yeah. But if in the presence of mutation, you need to decide the drug. But if you see, ponatinib is one drug which can be used irrespective of any of the mutations, whereas rest of the bosutinib and dasatinib, nilotinib all has contraindications depending upon the mutation. I'm not sure. Quick question to the pathologist. Are we able to detect these mutations, which is F315, V299, So many mutations, the E25555KB. Are we doing it in India? Because the drugs are available.
Yeah, some of the MedGenome and some of the people are doing.
Yeah.
Not
By
in
RT-PCR,
all,
depending on the primer which is available, yes, ma'am. Many of the mutations are being done in some centers, but not all of them, of course. But NGS as of now has not been advocated in hematology, so I do not have any experience.
MedGenome is doing many things.
Yeah, yeah.
Plus, yeah.
Are they doing it on NGS, ma'am?
Yeah. Tell me.
Are they doing it on NGS technology, ma'am? Because there are so many mutations. No, RT-PCR depends on the number of primers which are available.
They are doing NGS.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah, Dr. Aruna, if you have to change in a child, or like you said, up to 18 years, what would you do? Aruna,
we have had very little instances of this issue in children. Children do excellently on imatinib. So we have had only one child who was actually 14 years old. On routine follow-up, she was found to have a increase in the BCR-ABL percentage, and we had then put her on dasatinib. So that is maybe my one of the limited experience of starting a second-line TKI in a child.
Is this drugs approved in children?
Yes, ma'am. Dasatinib and nilotinib both are approved in children.
Nilotinib has been recently approved, ma'am. After a long time now, recently it has been approved.
Yeah. Quick question to our chairperson, Dr. Subhash, and those who do transplant. Why not transplant in a child?
So children, till now I have only transplanted a single child who developed lymphoid blast crisis. So it is again, otherwise in chronic phase, we don't even talk about transplants to pediatric CML patients. So only if they present in accelerated or blast crisis, or if they evolve into one, we talk about transplants to them.
Okay. So I think we have discussed this failure to treatment and 6 months yearly follow-up. Now, this was what I was trying to highlight as per the NCCN guidelines, contraindicated mutation for these drugs. So if you have that mutation, don't use the drug. But if you see ponatinib, which is I think not available, oxacitocin not available, but allogenic transplant is available, and trials I think not available. So if you don't have, that's one of the options. So I just wanted to highlight and wanted to know from the pathologist whether we are doing, and that's the way to go forward. Now, there is some change.
Coming back to just a small comment, ma'am.
Yeah, tell me.
You are discussing about the PCR versus NGS. Nowadays, labs have started doing NGS, and we have I had presented data in the last ASH comparing the results of NGS and the PCR, and the NGS was clearly superior in showing the number of mutations and also picking up the amount of percentage of mutations.
Okay.
Even people who had turned negative again was positive with NGS. So we could see that we could see as high as 6 mutations a single patient. So NGS will pick up more.
Okay.
Definitely, because the number of mutations which can be detected at any given point of time, definitely NGS is far superior when compared to RT-PCR.
And we have the drugs also. It's worth running it. So now quick question to the panelists. There's slight change in accelerated and blast crisis. We heard Dr. Prantha's talk nicely. He has placed the whole thing. So when do you define accelerated and when do you define a blastic phase? Is it the same or some changes have happened?
So the phases where the 3 guidelines are varying, the WHO 2016, the NCCN and the ELN are varying. So the NCCN and the WHO 2016 take presence of major root abnormalities upfront as accelerated phase. Whereas ELN says they are at high risk, but it doesn't say it's accelerated phase. And again, the blast count percentage, now NCCN has recently changed, and that was actually pretty surprising to see.
Yeah. See, and that's what the NCCN says. This is the modified one. Okay, so peripheral myeloblasts greater than 15, less than 30, and then both blood myeloblasts, pro-myeloid greater than 30% is that. And the blast crisis is greater than 30%, anything 30% and any extramedullary. I think blast remains the same, but the accelerated phase, some subtle changes over a period of time. Now, quick question to the panelists. I'm sure we do get accelerated CMLs, blast crisis CML. In this COVID pandemic, I got a blast crisis CML. How do you proceed to accelerated and blast phase?
What blast crisis, ma'am?
Any of the panelists? Dr.
What
Rajesh?
blast crisis? What blast crisis, ma'am?
Pardon?
Is it a myeloid blast crisis or lymphoid blast
How will
crisis?
you manage lymphoid or myeloid?
In this pandemic,
Myeloid.
Ma'am, if it's a myeloid blast crisis, it's an upfront de novo blast crisis, very different from the blast crisis which happened during progression, ma'am. So they clearly, if you look at them, they would be, I would treat a myeloid blast crisis with decitabine with or azacitidine with and in case of lymphoid blasts, I have given soft induction with vincristine, steroids, and dasatinib. If it is going to be an era where I could not put the patient, I even would put the patient only on a TKI, wait for in the COVID era, wait for some time. They would even nicely respond to the only TKI, like a second line TKI, dasatinib. I have seen patients responding only to TKI in myeloid blast crisis, even it's de novo. I have survivors on patients, more than 10 patients of survivors who are de novo blast crisis, myeloid blast crisis, only on TKI, more than 3 years, 4 years, 5 years with MR 4.5.
That is little new to anybody else. Yes, please tell me.
Sorry, ma'am. A comment regarding the blast percentage. So NCCN says that a blast crisis is blast percentage beyond 30%.
30%.
Whereas WHO 2016 says it is 20%.
Exactly.
WHO says it is between 9 and 19 is accelerated, and once it becomes 20, it is like AML or anything. It is a blast crisis.
Yeah.
So 20, we can take it to the lower cutoff is better. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
But NCCN is not agreeing with WHO. That's what I'm trying to point out.
Yes.
Yeah. There is okay. There is some difference.
Yeah.
Anybody else, Dr. Krishna? Yes, please. Anybody?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, it's an upfront accelerated blast crisis. We generally treat with second generation TKIs. If it is like a progressed from a CP, then we try to, in a blast crisis, depends on the whether it's a myeloid or lymphoid, we add the chemotherapy base with the TKI. And if they achieve the CP in a progressed case, achieving a CP, then we'll advise for allogeneic transplant. Otherwise, continue with the TKI.
TKI. Okay. And yes, the patient that we got was 58. Okay, with an myeloid blast crisis. So we started with nilotinib and decitabine. And we started in March, April, May, June.
Nilotinib is not approved for use in blast crisis, ma'am.
Okay, but it is an approved drug. Any TKI is approved.
No, not in blast crisis. Not in blast crisis.
Only it's approved only for use in chronic phase. It's approved for use in chronic phase and accelerated phase only, ma'am. Nilotinib is not approved for use in blast crisis. So only
what TKI will you use?
Dasatinib or ponatinib if you are already used imatinib. If you are not used imatinib, imatinib is also an option.
It can be used.
Right, and is an option.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else on this, or we move? Now, quick question on discontinuation. Who are the candidates you will think to discontinue? When will you discontinue?
Ma'am, it's a set criteria. There are a lot of things, ma'am. In the sense, the patient has to take a first, if it's imatinib, at least imatinib for 5 to 8 years. And there's a deep molecular response for at least 2 to 3 years. It's going to be a second line TKI, either nilotinib or dasatinib. At least they must have taken a total of 3 to 4 years, of which at least the patient must have been in a deep molecular response for 2 years. And again, there are a lot of other things. They must not have an atypical transcript. They must not have any issues with compliance. They must not have any other mutations detected at any point of time. These are all few points which has to be taken. And patient must be very committed enough to come to test. That's the important thing. That's the most important thing in India, and must have accessibility to testing. Now, if you look at in Chennai, a lot of patients could not come for accessibility. I simply restarted them back because they could not come. They are within 6 months. And people who had crossed 1 year, I safely pray God and I'm doing it. Wait. So less than 1 year, I stopped. Just like that, I told please restart. Call them and told restart the tablets.
What opinion from the other panelists? Even Dr. Pranta, who are you stopping? When are you stopping? Whom are you stopping?
Sorry, in addition to what?
Sorry. I'll say the first important thing is the mindset. Mindset, I told you, because I know that a lot of labs are doing, but I still have my suspicions on the quality of the BCR-ABL quantitative. So when a patient tells me, sir, can I stop the drug? I clearly tell them that we have seen that we can stop in certain groups of patients, but that means that you achieve a good response, and more importantly, as Jayachandran said, that you will agree to frequent monitoring, and I would be satisfied with the quality, because otherwise, it becomes a disaster. And one thing was mentioned just when the first talk was going on, that the cost of qPCR at this point of time is more than the drug. So I know cost is not supposed to be discussed, but I think soon it will be, because it has to be a patient reported outcome also. So if the patient feels, I would definitely stop it in people who are planning, females who are planning to get pregnant, because then that is the only way. The other is, there are some people who say that, I can get this much, but for only this year's, then I'll not get the cost of the drugs reimbursed. So I go it on an individual basis, but frankly speaking, I have not done it in many patients. 6 patients till now have done it. And in those patients, I have seen their level of motivation. So their mindset coupled with my perception of their mindset usually determines it when I go by what is optimal, what is mandatory, as I showed you.
Correct. Thank you.
So add to what Dr. Prantar said, see, there are 3 people involved in the equation: the clinician, the patient. You forgot the third person, that is a pathologist. Before you think of TFR, you have to confirm 2 things with pathologists. First is, the NCCN says that the machine sensitivity has to be MR 4.5. Now in India, quite a few machines have a sensitivity which is between 4 and 4.5. So you have to ensure that the machine has a sensitivity MR 4.5. And the second thing is, NCCN says that the result has to come within 2 weeks. For quite a few times, the results get delayed. So these are 2 things you have to confirm the pathologist before you consider doing TFR in your center.
Exactly, Ajay. This is the point I want to make up. You have to always have a contact with your molecular pathologist. For any issues, you have to directly call him and contact him. What is the issue?
Jayachandran, that's why we got 3 pathologists on panel with us.
Ma'am, there is one thing. When the BCR-ABL level is very low, the repeatability is of an issue in some of the centers. I mean, it is a very, when the value is very high, the repeatability is always good. When it is of low, the detection and the repeatability differs. That is the one problem with the quantitative PCR also.
That is always to be standardized in the lab, ma'am. In our molecular lab, we clearly do it in doubles. So each sample will be tested two samples, 2 times.
That is there.
So we confirm it by 2 times BCR-ABL, 2 times ABL will be done in the PCR wells. And if both the values are coming equally only, they will be publishing the report. Otherwise, they will repeat the report.
Dr. Subbiah, Rajesh and Subbiah, your contact.
Lot of labs doesn't do it. So then only the issues of there occurs a problem. So always it must be done in double standardization, doubles 2.
Yeah, but the inherent problem is, when it is in the lower level, it is that is the inherent problem of.
Ma'am, we have the standard value ABL copies, ma'am. The ABL copies is coming as more than 10,000 or 32,000 or 50,000. Then we are very sure that ABL copies has been amplified and BCR is not amplified. That is very clear on that, ma'am.
Yeah, probably if I can just add a quick point, I think the definition of MR 4.5 means that you need to look at least 32,000 copies. So that's your definition for 4.5, MR 4.5. So I think that's something which we need to look at.
Yeah, Dr. Aruna.
Yes.
Yeah, see, if you see the criteria for TKI discontinuation as per 2020 NCCN, they say age should be above 18. They're not talking about juvenile CMLs and small kids for discontinuation. What is your
None of the
thought
trials
process?
has included. None of the trials has included patients for discontinuation, ma'am. So
in
it is not
children,
a hard and it is not a hard and fast rule, ma'am.
Correct.
If you have a child which is continuing and they want to get pregnant later on, you can try it. By the time the kid will become 18 years, I think there will be no reasons for which the patient would need to stop before 18 years.
Yes,
Is there anything?
So that is what I think that is totally what we do. We continue giving the drugs and we do not talk about stopping the drugs, but there are occasional instances where they would have stopped it themselves. So that is the scenario we may have to follow these children with quantitative BCR-ABL or during a pregnancy, which often they outgrow the pediatric age group.
Correct. Okay. I think we will any side effects, major side effects with nilotinib. Have you faced it's not only for nilotinib, I just want to discuss over here, what are the rare toxicities you see with this TKI? Something with dasatinib, something with nilotinib, and yes, imatinib. This is with nilotinib. Okay, I had 2-3 patients on dasatinib with pleural effusion, bilateral effusion, which needed, even went up to ICD. And anybody else thought process have rare toxicities?
What I mentioned previously, dasatinib had caused a very bad pulmonary hypertension. When I went back to the literature, there has been a lot of case reports and lot of trials has reported. And the patient could not even lie down. He was simply coughing. And very bad pulmonary hypertension. And it causes a lot of pulmonary toxicities. Apart from pleural effusion, it causes pericardial effusion, it causes pulmonary vascular damage. And with nilotinib, again, it's not an easy drug. I've seen a lot of patients having LFT derangement, going up to 3. We have to come down the drug. We have seen patients going out with hypertriglyceridemias. I have seen patients with vascular events at a MI.
Yes.
So yeah, ma'am, if I can just quickly add, we had a patient who presented with pancreatitis after nilotinib, after being put on nilotinib, because of hypertriglyceridemia causing pancreatitis again in that patient. So that was a very rare situation which we had to encounter. And as far as dasatinib is concerned, we also have data to show that people who want to develop the side effects, like Jayachandran pointed out, pulmonary hypertension, they actually go on to do better as well. It's a predictive marker of response as well.
Okay, that's a good information. Dr. Arun, Dr. Rajesh, Dr. Subbiah.
I'll talk about some more common complications other than the rare complications.
Yeah, okay.
Myelosuppression is a very not talked about side effect of the second line TKAs. People say that the second line TKAs are much better than imatinib, but we have seen cases who have come with very bad cytopenias even 10 days after starting the drug, both nilotinib and dasatinib. So it is not that the second generation TKAs are perfectly safe and imatinib is the bad way.
Absolutely agree with Bharathan on that.
Bharathan, but just to tell you, actually, I didn't get time. There is NCCN has put it as a guidelines. There is a separate CML dash with persistent neutropenia. There's a special issue in 2020. I saw it and read it, but didn't get time to put it. That's why I wanted for discussion.
Okay.
The neutropenia substance there, and it is reported. It is now we have guidelines to do it. Quickly, I think. Sorry. With the drugs. How safe are you with imatinib? How safe are you with nilotinib, dasatinib? So that's the end. Too crowded, but you tell me your thought process. Today's evening is just how what is our experience. So this is what the Western population says. Okay, I want all the panelists to say a word with the drug interaction before we sign off for today's webinar. Aruna, you can start with children.
So we always face maybe the easier questionnaire. So we do not have comorbidities. So per se, we do not even talk about drug interactions to children. And regarding the side effects, our long-term side effect we are worried is the short stature, which is a well-documented side effect of imatinib usage in children. But otherwise, if we cross the first 3 months of and they become tolerant to the drug, they do relatively very, very well on imatinib. They even become fair and they become happier.
So one comment, ma'am. So in all CML symposiums, I used to make this comment for all of them. So this interaction of grape fruit juice with nilotinib is not our grapes. please don't ask our people not to take grapes. It is the grapefruit. I think grapefruit is different from our regular grapes. Grapefruit is that bumbly must, we call it as the big sort of orange. So it is that one which is contraindicated with the use of nilotinib, which will increase the levels of nilotinib. So people always tell don't eat grapes, go back and don't eat lot of fruits. So again, it is very important to give people.
Yeah. So if you see the last two lines, that any herbal, that means any Ayurvedic preparation is absolutely contraindicated during this, because everywhere the levels are increased. Now, if you see, if you have some abnormality with the antibiotics, levofloxacin, ciprofloxacin, moxifloxacin, it is the nilotinib which is contraindicated. Rest of the things go very well.
I think just a point, ma'am. I think one most thing is, most of these patients are actually, they get prescribed proton pump inhibitors as well.
Yeah, it's there in the first row.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's something that needs to be seriously watched at, because most of them, either they see someone else or close to their native place or somebody for some dyspeptic symptoms, or maybe not taking the drug the right way. For example, imatinib needs to be taken with food as well. So and they get immediately started on a PPI. So I think that's something which really needs to be looked at, and you'll have to, really tell them how to go about that.
And if you see this sheet, what you said is correct. Proton pump inhibitors is definitely has to be. But if you see the last column, ponatinib, most of the places ponatinib doesn't have any interaction. But anyhow, ponatinib is not here. Not for
ponatinib is a dangerous drug, ma'am. It's not an easy drug to use. We have used in a lot of patients under compassionate use, and also
we are getting into dangerous.
It is not an easy drug to use, ma'am. We had a patient who had with cerebral venous thrombosis, a patient who had an hemiplegia. It's a black box. It has a black box warning of having a arterial events. So it's not an easy drug to use, and hence it is not approved for use in first line. Even in the West, it is not used approved for use in first line.
It's not approved.
It's very bad arterial events. About 10%.
Quickly, anybody wants to give out any comments or anything that we did not discuss in today's meeting? I think it's time for us to sign out. Okay. Anybody wants any aspect that we did not discuss? Rajesh, Dr. Subbiah, anybody, Dr. Bhabesh?
I think, ma'am, we have covered
Dr.
almost everything. Right?
You can add, and we can start. Yeah, we tried to rush into everything. Dr. Prantha, then you give the concluding remarks. Dr. Prantha Chakravarti, sir is there. Okay, or Dr. Subhash Cherian.
Yeah, I have unmuted myself. I request all my colleagues, and juniors, just to keep on documenting the side effects, because we see a lot of things, and it is time that we document them, and then we can firmly believe, because, when we have a cafeteria choice, ultimately it comes to the side effects. If all of them are effective as per so many studies, then obviously the side effect profile, the tolerability profile, which leads to better compliance, decides the game. So I think it is good to document it, and collaborative documentation of side effects is one important thing which we should do. And the other request to all the molecular pathologists is, please ensure that, we get the reports if you are aware that someone is not doing something, because I did a survey about 8 years back, and some of them said that it's a trade secret. They will not tell me how they calculate the ratio, what is their standard. So I was a bit, very much perturbed. So I would request you, I know we are sending samples to certain private companies also. They are also saying about NGS and all, but please form a consortium for quality assurance, because otherwise, the patient, as was rightly said by Dr. Partha, that the patient is there, we are there, but we are depending on something on which we have no control. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for the inputs. Anybody, I think it's time for us to sign out. I think there are some questions in the chat box. Kashish, I think paucity of time, we will sign out. Thank you, everybody. I think we had a very interactive discussion, and more than 75 people all over the country logged in at some point of time in the last almost 2 hours to listen to us. Thank you very much. Dr. Purvish Parikh is there. Sir, any comments from your side?
Ma'am, sir is not.
Okay, sir has left. Okay, fine. Thanks, Kashish and Kavina Creations. Thanks to Vijay Bharati and the Freedom from Cancer. And I thank everybody for an excellent participation. We were thinking whether CML will be good or not, because with many companies have discussed, but I think lots to discuss. You know, we'll come back again. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay connected. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, Dr. Datta, we missed you. Sorry, but you are still there.
No, this is a question to Cancer. If you have to choose between, if you have to choose between nilotinib and dasatinib, which one will you choose? After failed with first one, imatinib.
Yeah, any of the panelists, please take the question.
Yeah.
Sir, it wholly depends on the answer.
Yeah. Yes, Dr. Jayachandra.
Sir, it depends on the in the second line, as we already discussed, it depends on the mutation, sir. If you don't have a mutation, then we go ahead and see the patient's comorbidities. Nilotinib can cause a lot of, in the sense, it can cause a lot of patients like hyperglycemia, hyperglycemia. It can cause increased cardiovascular comorbidities. Whereas dasatinib, on the other hand, can cause a lot of pulmonary complications, pericardial effusions, long-standing pulmonary hypertension. So you have to weigh the risks and benefits. And again, in nilotinib, it's twice-a-day medications and a lot of food interactions, drug interactions. Dasatinib has relatively lesser drug interactions. So you have to choose between and give the option to the patient and take a collective decision, as the economically the drugs cost almost equal.
Yes, Dr. Datta, we want to hear some more comments from you.
So as can I understand, Dr. Jayachandran, you will use dasatinib as the first choice instead of linotinib in cases of imatinib failure.
Not really, sir. Depending on the patient preference and complications, sir.
No, have you encountered such situation? That's what.
After only we'll encounter, sir. Now only we have a generic imatinib, generic dasatinib, sir. So after we'll have that encounter. Previously we had only nilotinib, which was cheaper than dasatinib, original dasatinib. Now after we once have the generic dasatinib, we will encounter. Then we will have the next meeting when we will give you the real answer.
Otherwise, your experience with nilotinib is good?
Yes, sir. As of ours, our experience with nilotinib was far better than, because our experience with nilotinib was better than use of dasatinib. After maybe we should know, we will have equal comparisons.
Yeah, yes. Nilotinib I have used for many patients, okay, because I use with the scheme, okay, patient almost gets it free in the medical college, okay, and high risk anyhow, intermediate high risk, I will go for nilotinib. We have more than 15 to 20 patients, relatively a safe drug, not much of complication, entered so far, maybe in the last 2 to 3 years after nilotinib was launched. So it's easy to manage. I do not know, like how all the panelists said, what's the long-term effect, but but with dasatinib, 2 patients I had ICD. So I also think twice with dasatinib, but it's a good drug, nilotinib.
Thank you.
We request Dr. Datta to give, we are 3 minutes short of 9. Sir, 3 lines and we sign off.
Everything has been discussed. Many people have already given the concluding remarks. Extremely useful one. So we need to know about the newer drugs. I mean, the newer uses, that is this discontinuation of the traditional imatinib and when to switch over to that. And what will be the problem thereafter? How many are getting into relapse and how many require a bone marrow transplant and things like that. That's what I can say. Thank you so much.
Okay. Also, we thank Novartis for bringing us in the digital platform. We have people from different states joining us today night. Thank you very much. Stay safe, stay healthy. Namaskar.
Ma'am, just one last comment from the chat box.
There's too many chat box messages.
Yes, Dr. Shubhaya has mentioned that any patient who is not tolerating 400, would you like to decrease, and have you seen any patient? Means my question to addition to it is whether you will decrease the dose or you will go to the second line.
Anybody else take it?
Possible if a patient is affordable. Again, see, the patient is not tolerating imatinib, patient will also not tolerate dasatinib and nilotinib. There are very small chance that they will tolerate the second drug. You can try the second line drug. If the patient is not tolerating the second line drug, you can come back to the imatinib. I go as low as 200 mg. I don't go below that.
Because sir has put in chat box that one of his patient is maintaining at 100 milligram. I mean,
Yeah,
I have not seen any patient.
Patients maintain at
Patients will be in 100.
Yeah. One important comment I want to make is, ma'am, bone marrow
Yeah, tell me.
is not dead in CML, ma'am. We still do bone marrow transplantation, stem cell transplantation for patients with 2-line failure.
Correct.
And in blast crisis also. So even now we have 2 patients in our unit with post bone marrow transplantation and in the post transplant follow-up.
Yes, Jayachandran, that's the approved indication. You only
That's very important thing we should keep it. Because we don't have ponatinib here, T315I mutations are very common when we started doing the NGS. So we should keep that into mind. We should not completely burn out that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. We sign off tonight. Thanks. Stay safe.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, ma'am. Bye. 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 Bye.